You're listening to Accounted For, the Canadian podcast that explores the intangibles of every career. I'm your host, Daniel Lee. Hello. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Happy Hump Day. This is a podcast to inspire unconventional careers, and it is a part of OMD Ventures, my platform on a mission to create utopian organizations. If you'd like to find out more about what this all means, definitely check out the site at omdventures.com to learn more. And if you want to maybe ask a question for me or just have any kind of general career-based questions, feel free to ask them on the site as well. You can reach me at omdventures/contact, and with enough questions, I'll try to create some kind of AMA episode of sorts so it can answer questions that many other listeners like yourself might have as well. Really try to be part of the community by subscribing to the newsletter, where I provide what I would call quote-unquote exclusive content on my journey in terms of creating this media platform and all the things I do to update my own systems in life. And I'll also provide links straight up to the essay, podcast, and the learnings newsletter that I produce every week as well. Awesome. So today's conversation is with Carolyn Plater. She is a psychotherapist and mental health clinician who is the co-founder of Hoame, North America's largest meditation studio, and it is spelled Hoame. And she is also the co-founder of Ease, which is spelled EASE, something with ease. And that is the corporate wellness consulting company that is also the parent company of Hoame. Before starting Hoame and Ease 2 years ago, Carolyn spent more than 10 years really in the mental health space as a therapist, clinician, and crisis worker. And she worked with various mental health patients in schools, foster homes, hospitals, and other various centers as well. Through her mother's nursing career, it got her influence to this dream of really having a career of helping people in the future. But it would be this kind of pivotal decision to transfer out of her English major in university that sent her down this world of psychology and mental health. Her frustration with the reactionary nature of mental health care really led to starting this company called Ease with her current co-founder Steph, and they ventured out to create a state-of-the-art meditation studio in downtown Toronto. And I visited this studio when we did the actual podcast interview, and Carolyn was gracious enough to give me a tour of the place, and it actually feels state-of-the-art. They have all this cool technology stuff, different kinds of themes for different kinds of meditation rooms, like a sauna room, a salt crystal cave, which I thought was the coolest thing ever, like a light room, a dark room. And they have all kinds of cool, neat technology you just don't expect to find in a meditation studio. So I think that was really cool stuff. So in our chat, we go through all these various aspects of the meditation studio, but we also go in depth into Carolyn's journey and her experience with meditation, how people could get started with it to begin with, and the entrepreneurial journey of starting a meditation studio specifically, because I would say it's different from the traditional digital businesses we are so familiar with hearing about. Also, Carolyn was kind enough to provide a code for you, my listeners, where you can get one free meditation session if you book and go, I think by the end of the year. And the code is Accounted For 100. So the name of the podcast, Accounted For, with the number 100 right behind it, and it's all capitalized. And I will also provide that in the show notes below as well, but just in case. Yeah, so definitely use that to get your own first free meditation session, and see how you like having an actual in-person guided meditation studio experience. I definitely will be doing it myself as well. And so here is my conversation with Carolyn. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Today on the podcast, we have Carolyn Plater. Hey Carolyn, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Carolyn here is the co-founder of Hoame and Ease, and she's also a psychotherapist and a mental health clinician. So Carolyn, that's a pretty long title for someone. And so to give our audience kind of an understanding of what your company Hoame, as well as maybe Ease does.
Yep.
Like, that'd be great if you can give us some background on that.
Sure. So myself and my co-founder, we've been working together in mental health for about 10 years now. We actually started working together first in addiction medicine, and we were working at a methadone maintenance clinic. And what we were seeing was so much stress-related illnesses, things like addictions even being exacerbated by stress. And so both my best friend and I at the time were like, okay, well, what are some other ways that we can help people, right? We're doing this counseling and doing this therapy, but we're also big into research and science. And so we started reading about things like mindfulness and meditation. And that really led us on this journey that I ended up doing my yoga teacher training, my meditation certificate. And it was really then that we were like, okay, we know that there's so many benefits to mindfulness and meditation beyond just mental health. There's physical health benefits. There's lots and lots of benefits. How do we get Torontonians kind of connected to this practice in sort of a modern and innovative way? And that was how we really started the first concept, like concepting the idea of Hoame. We were like, it really started as this dream around Steph. Like, she's my best friend and co-founder. It was around her dinner table, a couple of glasses of wine. And we're just kind of like, wouldn't it be cool if you had this place that was like, you know, you'd have a studio and it would have stars on the ceiling, or you could have a salt cave, or you could have all of these things, but all around meditation and mindfulness. And that was really like the first seeds of Hoame, was around that dining room table. And then kind of fast forward, we actually then created a business plan. We were doing a lot of corporate wellness and consulting at the time as well. And so we were already weaving in meditation and mindfulness to that work. And it just seemed like this really organic fit. We ended up, you know, talking to the right people, making a really great, solid team. And we created Hoame. It's been open now for 14 months.
Wow. And so Hoame is the meditation studio, and
Yes.
Ease is your corporate, I guess, consulting
Yeah.
company.
So Ease is like our holding company. So we've been doing, Steph and I have been running corporate wellness trainings and education for about 5 years now. And that was under Ease. And the whole reason that we called it Ease in the first place was we wanted mental health and mental wellness to be easy for corporations to understand. Because a lot of times when we were talking about mental health, we kind of complicate it, right? And then it kind of scares people away from it. People aren't sure, how do you talk about mental health in the workplace? And so by us kind of coming in and saying, okay, we can make it easy for you, that was really the origins of that. And then, yeah, Hoame was really the meditation space. And we're a 5,100 square foot space here in Toronto.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the largest meditation studios in North America.
That's right. From what we know currently, it is the largest meditation studio in North America. So.
And yeah, like you were gracious enough to give me a nice tour of the place. And yeah, it's actually pretty big. I was very surprised too, because from the outside, it doesn't look like it goes deep, but
that's
you
right.
have these huge rooms where people, I think, how many can you fit in one meditation room?
We have about, we could have about 25 to 30 people comfortably in each space,
Gotcha.
depending on if they're seated or laying down. And then we have our front space, which we can kind of open up, as you saw, into a larger space. And we can have about 75 people in here. So,
wow.
Yeah, we can have some big classes.
Yeah. And Hoame, the actual spelling of it, why is there an A? It's Hoame.
That's a question we get often.
Okay.
So it's actually kind of funny. When we were concepting the name, we were throwing out all these different ideas, and we had, Hoame was not the first name that we came up with, and we were calling it something else for a long time. But then over time, we always kept referring to our team as our family. We kept referring to the space where people can gather as our living room. Like, it was always like this home vibe. We often kept saying that we want it to feel like people are at home. We kept saying home, but we never like kind of sat on that as a brand or a name. And then one day our colleague came out and she was like, you know what about this? She's like, just try me, but what do you think about this? And she put out the name Hoame, and she just put the A. Truthfully, it's a little bit of a creative flair. It's just a little bit of a differentiator from the name Hoame. But we love it because it has, one, it's, it just kind of looks interesting. But also home means so many things to so many people. And when it comes to meditation and mindfulness, it's about finding a home within yourself or going back home. And then, of course, there's the universal sound, which is Om. And so that's in there. So lots of meanings to it. Yeah. And
so growing up, did you grow up in Toronto?
I did.
And so I'm wondering, was your home kind of this very meditative atmosphere? Like, was it a very calming environment that you grew up in?
I don't know if I would say it was calming, per se. It wasn't not calming. But it's interesting, actually. I really wasn't into meditation or mindfulness growing up at all. It was nothing that I really practiced. If anything, I was, I did my undergrad in psych. I was very science oriented. I was like, this stuff to me was like totally out there, you know. And it's funny because my mom's a nurse, and even though she has a medical background, she's been into meditation and mindfulness for ages. Oh. You know, we've had crystals in random corners of our house, like since I was a kid. But I always thought she was like a little out there when she would do these things. I'm like, okay, Mom, like whatever. And then it wasn't really until that the science, like so many of us, once the science starts catching up with it, you know, I mean, meditation's been practiced for thousands of years, but now the science is starting to support it and has caught up. And it was me reading research papers actually to help my clients with anxiety and stress that led me to kind of being like, okay, you know, there's something here. And that was what started my journey. So not the childhood thing. It was actually later on. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I also read in a previous interview that your mother is actually a very big role model for you.
She is.
And so I'm wondering, did that influence your, I guess, branch into the mental health industry? Or what was like when you were growing up? Did you want to be someone in the medical field as like a 7-year-old or like 10-year-old?
I think so. Like I always had this, like I knew I was going to help people, like kind of go into a helping profession. Like that was always something that I was drawn to, like psychology and therapy and nursing. And I kind of had this idea that that's what I was going to go into, or education. That was another one that I was really interested in. And so actually, even when I started my undergrad, I was actually in an English major because I was like, oh, I'm going to go into teaching. And then I took a first psych class in first year, and that just like changed everything for me. And that was then I switched my major that year, and then I kind of started my journey. But my mom actually was working as an addictions nurse. And so during my undergrad, I actually got a job at the addiction clinic. And it was really then that I got super into mental health and to mental wellness. It was really my work working with people with serious opiate dependencies.
And what gave you the conviction to switch over from being an English major? My understanding is that when you were in English, you were considering teaching or even like law as a profession.
Law was the other one, yeah.
And, you know, like when people at least my friends, when they tend to consider law as a profession, there's a big ambitious career element to become this white collar lawyer. Right. And to switch into psychology quickly from that, I'm wondering what gave you the conviction to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the type of person I am. It's like once something just feels right, it's easy for me to make these kind of like big life switches. And for me, it was sitting in that first year psych course, and I learned about abnormal psychology, which is all the diagnoses and the sort of interesting facets about human beings. And it was there that I was like, this is just like where I'm supposed to be. And I mean, I'm like that. I changed, and we could talk about this later on as well, but I changed to veganism 3 years ago, and it was the very same thing. It was like this switch. I went from eating meat one day to that was it, and I never went back. And it's very similar to how just with the English major, it's like once I made that switch, it's done.
Do you find that you tend to be on the scale of someone who just can make a huge shift radically?
Yeah. If it feels right, it's like I just know it and I don't need to kind of question it. It's just like go with what you know. So
have you tried the other way of maybe making like small incremental steps?
Yeah. I mean, I think I tend to be a little bit of a go big or don't go at all kind of person. I mean, even as you can see with building Hoame, we really just jumped in. We just, I'm not an entrepreneur. That's not my background. And we kind of just jumped into this because we really had this strong belief in what we were doing here.
Mm-hmm. And if I were to kind of lay out your career, you studied psychology at York, then you did Masters of Social Work at U of T, and it seems like you've had a wide variety of work experience in like various clinics, foster homes, and it seems like a decade-long career in like as a health clinician and psychotherapist.
I love that you've done your homework on me. I
love
it.
It's one of the things I like to do.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm not very familiar with the world of, I guess, the career space of what psychology grads do after graduating. And so I'm wondering, when you came out of school, what was the kind of optional like path out there for you? So to give you perspective, and like I graduated from accounting from like a business program. So when we graduated, it was practically they tell you have 3 options. You can be an accountant, a consultant, or you can go into finance. I ended up doing all 3, but most people don't end up actually doing all 3. They just stick to one path and they just go all the way. Yeah. So I'm wondering for psychology grads, like what what are the doors that are open, at least for you? What was it?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I think that's the challenge sometimes with being a psych major. That was what I realized at the end of this 4 years. I think I was in psych originally thinking I'm going to become a clinical psychologist. That was kind of my initial game plan. It's a lot of school. I ended up doing quite a bit of school afterwards, but then I graduated with 4-year psych degree, and a lot of people ask, like, what do you do with this psych degree? And that was the question that I asked as well. And so I started working at the methadone clinic. My mom was working there, so I'm very luckily kind of was in the right place at the right time. It was also a clinic that was just starting to really grow. So I had this opportunity to kind of get a foot in the door just as they were starting to shift over to hiring addiction counselors. So I actually then, in between that and my master's, I went back to school and I did a postgraduate diploma in addiction counseling. And once I had that, then I could actually counsel clients and patients from the clinic. So that was like my first step in, was just, again, like through my mom, through this network and being there at the methadone clinic. But I always am the type of person, like, it's like, well, what else can I do? Or what more can I be doing? And I had so many interests. Like, it was a big interest of mine to work in a hospital. So I did for 6 years. I was a crisis clinician in the emergency department at a couple local hospitals. But then I also started my private practice, which I'm still running. And I actually ended up back in teaching, which is what I had kind of had that original love for. So I ended up, and I'm still actually an instructor at a couple colleges and universities. So that's a question that I often will tell my students, is you can do so many things with a psychology degree or a social work degree, because I feel like it's the type of degree that really can like fit many different fields. So, I mean, we see a lot of grads of psych now going into marketing and advertising, right? Because there's so much psychology to selling. We see a lot of psychology grads now creating, businesses or in the health and wellness world. And so it's exciting to see. I do feel like it's a type of, once you kind of figure out, okay, what are your ways that you can go? What are the routes? But I think you can do a lot with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think when I think back on my own journey, like I initially thought I'd be a psychiatrist. That's one of the options.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, because I loved talking to people, and so that's also one of the reasons why I do a podcast now. It's just because I love talking to people. And
awesome.
Obviously, when you're young, though, like the parents have the fear that, well, maybe if you talk to mental people all the time, maybe it'll impact you negatively. Right. So they had concerns around that. And so I ended up going to business just all on the fact that I loved talking to people, and I eventually became an investor purely based on like the behavioral finance element of investing. Whereas a lot of
psych in that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love reading all the psych books, and even like my research papers. I end up getting to a chance to like talk with like Professor like Dan Ariely, because I've been like a big fan of his work. Yeah. And so I can definitely see this fluid element to this kind of field, but it also makes me feel like, because there's not a defined path, that it can lead to a lot of confusion when you're traversing through it. Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, for you, how did you separate like being a clinical psychologist or like a mental health clinician or a psychotherapist? Like, how did you even, is it really like easily laid out that these are very distinctly different roles? Because it doesn't really sound like it. It seems like they all touch on very similar things. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting now. I mean, I never would have guessed. Now looking back, it was 15 years ago that I graduated from undergrad, but that the career would have gone the way that it did. Right. It was pretty surprising to me, but I think that's kind of the exciting part as well. And that's been the exciting part of a career like this, is that you can kind of make it what you want. And you're right. It's certainly not for everyone, because it's not always clearly defined. And sometimes we just want this answer of like, where am I going and what am I doing? But I would often say to my students, that I do so many different things in this field, because that's my form of self-care. That's what keeps me fresh and excited with being in this field. If I was just a crisis counselor in the emergency department, 40 hours a week, I would probably be overwhelmed with what we see all the time. But being able to go in there for 1 or 2 shifts a week, and then I'm in my private practice, and then I'm with a group of students teaching, it gives me kind of that life. It gets me excited. And so then when I'm at each place, I'm excited and ready to be there. And so for me, it's the variety of that has just been so important to me.
And when you compare yourself to your peers, let's say, I guess, when you graduated from psychology, you made a bunch of friends. When you compare yourself to your peers there, do they seem to have a very similar kind of career outline as you, where they work in various different clinics as well? Or do you find that they end up going to maybe like one hospital and just specializing deeply? That's
typically what I find. And I think that's why I connected so much with my best friend, Steph, and my co-founder here, was that she very much shares this kind of same spirit that I do of, kind of being in a lot of different places and connecting with lots of different people in lots of different fields, and then kind of merging this all together into one kind of career. And so she's just always just got it and had that entrepreneurial spirit that I've always had as well. But you're right. Yeah. A lot of people kind of prefer the sort of, straighter line, I think. Yeah.
And I read that when you started Hoame, one of the reasons behind it was, I guess, this kind of frustration where the mental health world was always very reactive to people that came in
Absolutely.
with problems. So I'm wondering, can you paint a picture of what kind of state do these people come in when they come to see you?
And that was something that we were getting it was really frustrating, me as a clinician, was that most of the time, by the time that people come to get help, so whether they're coming into an emergency department, calling a crisis line, seeing a therapist, they're at a place where their mental health is already so low that they've already sort of had, some catastrophes happening, right? They're coming in an acute crisis state. And then we have to mobilize a whole bunch of resources really quickly to help bring that person back up to kind of a baseline functioning. And it was feeling, particularly in the hospital, I was feeling like it was this revolving door of people. It was like they'd come in there in crisis, and we try to kind of bring them up to this baseline level, but then there'd be 5 or 10 more people waiting to come in with the same kinds of things. And a lot of what we were seeing in the emergency department was this direct result of these lifestyle stressors that many of us are kind of experiencing today. High stress jobs, fast paced, lots of pressures when it comes to like finances, to the way that we live our lives here, the pressures of work, those kinds of things. And so it was people having panic attacks, anxiety attacks, depressive episodes, suicidal thinking. Again, many of it related to kind of just poor lifestyle and the hustle and bustle of our life. And so I was feeling frustrated that, like, why are we waiting until people are at such a low point before we're able to provide support? And how do we get people to kind of do preventative wellness, right? How do we get people thinking about their mental health, just like we do our physical health? And how can we start doing things to keep ourselves well? And that was really what led me to like meditation and mindfulness are all things that we can do on a daily basis to kind of keep ourselves well. And so that was like one of the really big guiding forces behind creating Hoame, was creating this really unique space that is focused around meditation and mindfulness in a cool way.
Okay. And was that something you were already practicing for your own mental health while you were a clinician?
Totally. Yes. And so that was something, especially when I started into the hospital system it's about 7 years ago. But it was realizing, one is like the intensity of the cases that we were getting. I was working night shifts as well. And that was something that was also really hard for me. It was like working night shifts, and then sometimes I'd have day things and I would be constantly kind of flipping. But also then it was a stress management thing. It was like what really led me to like, if I'm going to talk about meditation and mindfulness, then I need to know what I'm talking about. So that was what started my own journey into meditation and mindfulness. And I was originally just doing it as research initially. I was like, okay, like if I'm going to talk about it with my clients, like I need to know. And then it became a lifestyle for me. I did my 200 hours of yoga training. I did another 100 hours in trauma-informed yoga. And then I did my meditation mindfulness certificate. Oh, wow. So it kind of like triggered this whole thing for me.
And how did this like research even begin? Like, how did you get over the hump of, it's not backed by much science, and getting the initial kind of foot in the door to dive into this world?
Yeah, I mean, it was just starting to do some reading. I mean, my mom has gone on like these meditation retreats, these Vipassanas, like the silent. I'm actually going to do my first one this year, 2020. So that's exciting. But the 10-day kind of silent retreat. But she's always been kind of doing that practice. And so that was really kind of my first kind of like, okay, maybe I can read about this or look this up. And then it was in a lot of my classes as well. Like there was starting to be elements of it. And I was like, okay, if they're bringing that into grad programs now, and if they're bringing it into other things, there might be some benefits here. I was doing some research in addictions, and the hospital that I was working out of, they were also just starting to do research in meditation and mindfulness. So that was another kind of indicator to me. I'm like, the hospital's doing, research into this. Maybe there's some science here. And then I just started, the cursory Google searches and finding out, okay, there is real science behind this. And that was how it started.
Oh, okay. And another thing that I'm curious about is, so the world that I come from, like the world of professional services, people in accounting, consulting, a lot of people work hundreds of hours a week, and a lot of my friends, close friends, and also like myself, we've gone through various episodes of panic attacks and depression, and that's also what led me to my own meditation routine, but most of my friends don't do that. And what I'm wondering, like, what kind of people actually decide to come to seek like help at like a clinic?
Yeah. I mean, that's like versus like just coming like to like a clinic or a hospital.
Or,
you mean? Or...
I guess like the better question is like, what have you noticed that people have to go through some kind of like trigger for them to eventually decide that I need help, like to actually like give in to that you have a problem and you actually need help or something like this?
Totally. And that's usually what happens when people, I mean, when you end up in an emergency department, it's usually because something pretty severe ended up happening. Oftentimes, I mean, we see people having like panic attacks at work, and then they'll come into the emerge, or, I mean, they come in thinking that they're having a heart attack. Was very, very common, right? Because for those of you who haven't had a panic attack yet, most of us will have one in our lives. But if you haven't had one, the first time feels very much like a heart attack. It's very scary. It's very overwhelming. And so we would get people often coming in the middle of the night, like clenching their chest and, feeling like they're going to die, and then having to tell them that it was an anxiety attack, not a heart attack. And what was really interesting to me was also how quickly people would get angry that we're telling them that it was a panic attack, not a heart attack, right? Which often I think just shows how much the stigma of mental health is still there, that people would have rather been told it was a heart attack, right? And so that's oftentimes, sadly, when people start to take notice is when something really serious has happened. And that was really why, again, with this idea of creating a place like Hoame was to kind of to differentiate between that and a mental health clinic, right? That this is not a mental health clinic, that this is a place for like mental wellness, right? And so you can do the preventative piece. It's like a kind of an innovative, kind of cool space to come into, but there's not that stigma of like, oh, I'm going to Hoame, to work on my mental health, even though, kind of that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's also something where it's actually a great reframe where another part of me, I've been a competitive athlete for the last decade. And
cool.
so I've been competing in a sport called powerlifting.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
yeah, somewhat, yeah. And so, but, I've gone through surgery where I've blown out a knee and stuff. But that's taught me the value of having prehab instead of rehab, where you have preventative actual training. And so my warm-ups tend to take about an hour sometimes just to do all the warm-ups and mobility just before I actually get into the lifting.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah, and so I have to tell my friends that, well, you have to do all this stuff ahead of time so you don't actually get injured. You don't want to work on this stuff after you get injured. And
that's so important, right?
And it seems that, what you're doing here at Hoame is kind of creating that kind of space where you have that kind of prehab work so you don't actually have to go down the difficult path.
That's right. And then because you've invested that prehab, and I love that example, because you've invested that time and that energy into doing that beforehand, then oftentimes, even if it does, life happens, stressors happen, illness, physical ailments, those kinds of things, even when they happen, likely the drop isn't going to be so severe because you've invested this time in the prehab, right? Mm-hmm. Because you've learned these strategies and these skills, you're a little bit healthier than you were before, which means the crash won't be so hard. And so that's the other part, is also using meditation to build resiliency, your ability to kind of rebound back when something, goes on. So.
And then I think we talked about this a little before we actually started recording, but some people are not very open to meditation.
That's
and
right.
I think there's although it's a growing movement, I think there's still a lot who are still skeptical about it.
100%.
Unless there's like this proof, especially in this more quote unquote data driven world. Everyone's like, well, how can you prove to me that this is going to lead to like X% improvement?
Totally.
And I have that discussion with my friends all the time. And I've kind of just set my piece on, I'm going to meditate, and you can see by result of what it's doing for me. So
totally.
Up to you. But how do you communicate with people? Like, do you try to convince them, or what do these conversations go?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I was skeptical too. Like the idea of like just sitting quietly, like listening to your breath. Like to me, I'm like, what? Like, no, I'm like so not that kind of personality, right? And I was like, this is not. It seems almost too simple to have this kind of benefit. And so my advice always to people is to try it, and to try it yourself, because it wasn't until I actually got into it myself that then I was like, oh my gosh, okay, there really is something here. And it really was my own experiences that shifted it for me, was actually living it, like experiencing it. For me, it was really helpful to have it guided initially, because I needed that extra person to kind of like help me on that journey. But it was when I experienced it that then I remember opening my eyes after one of my first meditations, guided meditations, and being like, whoa, why doesn't everyone know this? Why don't more people know what this feels like? Because I felt instantly relaxed. I felt calmer. I felt just like a little bit more grounded. And so for me, I always tell people is to try it. But also, I mean, if you're the skeptic, like read the research, right? Look at the papers, like look at that, because that can often help too.
And so when you say guided, did you have like an app that guided you, or did you actually go in person to like another meditation studio?
Yeah, I went in person. So when it was during my yoga training was when I really got into it, and we did a big component of my yoga teacher training was actually in meditation. So, and that was when I felt like I could really start to fall into it, was when I started learning more about it. But always too, at the end of like yoga classes, like Shavasana and stuff, that was like my favorite spot. You know, my favorite part of the whole class was always that little bit of meditation at the end. But I do use apps as well, and I still really like using apps at nighttime as well.
What kind of apps do you use?
I use the Calm app. It's kind of like my primary one, although I use Headspace as well sometimes. But yeah, and Calm was one of like the very first meditation apps that I started to use. And that's one I recommend actually to a lot of my clients as well.
Yeah, I started with Headspace when they first launched. I think I started meditating back in 2015. I think.
Cool. So you've been doing it a long time now.
A little bit, yeah. Like I had my kind of breaking point where so when I was younger, I was diagnosed with an anger problem by like a psychiatrist, and eventually it continued, I think, escalating. Yeah. And then I had this kind of breaking point where I ended up punching a hole in the wall from frustrations and anger from work.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, and so that kind of
was like a
that was a breaking point of maybe I should do something about this. You know, instead of just kind of constantly doing what they tell you as like a guy, like push it down.
Totally. Well, that's the thing, right? And then it's funny because I always tell my clients, I was like, you can only push things down for so long before it erupts, right? Right. So that was the moment for you that kind of said like maybe meditation or could be.
Yeah, like I think that was definitely the thing, and I think I think people around me started noticing the difference. Where so afterwards I'd go on certain projects, like when I'd be in consulting, and I tell my boss, like, just so you know, I tend to have a bit of an anger issue. So if I explode, just know it's not you, it's me. So I usually like tell them ahead of time. I found that that's pretty helpful with just managing team relations. And
absolutely,
most of the time they started getting over time more surprised, where they're like, "Oh, you're such a calm guy. I don't expect that of you." And I think maybe the meditation might have helped creating that kind of persona or atmosphere. I don't know.
It's amazing, and I love hearing those stories, and I always appreciate when people can share the stories, and also how like meditation can be so helpful for so many things. And that's what I love about meditation is like it's not just, you know, sometimes we talk about it to manage stress or to help us relax, but it can help with anger. It can help with sleep. It can help with creativity or athletic performance. Like there are so many applications for meditation, and so that's so cool that it sounds like it's been really useful for you. Yeah,
it definitely has been. I think I've become more aware of that, especially in like my physical training too, where I think I realized I was meditating in some degree without realizing it, because there's a lot of that in like part of the thing where you want to get into this kind of mental zone.
Like a zone.
Yeah. Before you lift like 500 pounds.
Is it 500 pounds? Oh my gosh. Wow. That's intense. So yeah, you definitely need to be in the right headspace though to be able to lift. And
right.
And athletes, you're right, have been using like practices like visualization and stuff. I mean, that's been, you know, as part of probably not knowing that it was mindfulness or meditation, but it is, right? I mean, and that's been part of athletes, you know, like practice for a long time. So that's cool.
And so when you were working as a clinician with all these kinds of various people in terms of mental health, what actually do you do with these people? Like, can you give an example of how like the work actually looks like? Is it a lot of conversations, or
like with therapy, or with?
I guess like if you can even like differentiate between like the therapy and actually working in, I guess maybe I don't know how you would differentiate it. Sorry, like I'm very ignorant in this space.
Like in a client session.
Exactly. Yeah. Like because all I imagine is like, okay, I know what Freud did with people sitting down across, and they have the leather chair, and you just talk.
Lay down, and it's the whole thing.
And then there's all these like jokes about, you know. The therapist having like crossword puzzles while they're just talking to you. Oh, totally,
yeah. That's what we do. We watch iPad.
Right, exactly. Stuff, so I'm wondering what actually goes on. I'm very curious.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of like use a lot of different modalities, and I kind of say that my background is really eclectic when it comes to the therapeutic approach that I take. So for me, I prefer like a conversational style. I think that's often where people are more comfortable, when you just feel like you're having a kind of a one-on-one kind of conversation. So unlike Freud, I'm looking at the person. We have eye contact. They're not usually laying down. I'm definitely not playing crosswords. But it's a conversation, and I use a lot of goal-oriented work. So I like to try to figure out what is it that's bringing the client in today. What would make them feel like today was useful? And that's a question that I ask people always at the outset. How do you know that this hour that we're going to spend together will be of value or useful for you? And then we try to kind of gear it towards that. So what do they need to know kind of by the end of that hour? And then we'll talk about it. And it's really interesting. Oftentimes when people are like, I have nothing to say, we work with silence, right? And so we'll sit in silence, and then it's usually really powerful. Whatever comes after a period of silence often can be kind of a profound thing, and usually indicates that that's really what the person wants to talk about. And then we'll talk about it. And then oftentimes I try to provide different perspectives to the way that the person is thinking, because many of us come in with what we call cognitive distortions, these kind of like thinking errors. We all have an internal dialogue. We all have this narrative going on inside. And many times when we start to analyze that narrative, it can be pretty critical. It can be pretty harsh. It can be just not always the nicest. And so by taking it out of your mind and putting it out kind of in a therapy session, we kind of can objectively look at it in different ways, and how that thought might make you feel. And yeah, so it's like a lot of like playing with what's going on inside your head.
And I feel like that kind of stuff, it requires time to
It does.
build stuff out.
100%.
Yeah. Like I don't have a psych background, but I experimented with actually running kind of like therapy sessions for other kind of people in professional fields who wanted to go through a period of introspection, like I had done with my own career. And so
really?
That's
a lot of introspection.
We had like 2 hours of talk therapy every week, and we went deep into journaling, and we did that for about 2 months to kind of get something out of it. And these people they trusted me ahead of time so that we could run these kinds of programs. But for you, like when you're meeting strangers, like how do you establish that rapport so quickly for them to go, okay, after this 1 hour, I think you've added enough benefit for me to come back.
Yeah. I know. And that's a great question. And I think, again, it's really interesting when we look at what makes therapy successful. When you look at the literature that's out there, what actually makes therapy successful is the connection and the relationship you establish with the person. That's the most important thing. It's all about fit, much more so than the amount of degrees the therapist has or the approach that they take to therapy. It's literally that connection. It's, do I feel like I can connect with this person? And so that's usually like, when I first go to connection always first, it's like, how can I connect with this person? What can kind of bond us together? And it can be everything. I try to make people smile or make people laugh, or really early on, I try to make people comfortable in the space when they come into the space with me. I usually I don't start super personal. I tend to start really broad first when I'm talking, because then I'm warming that person up and I'm just building on that connection. And then from there, hopefully I can take it a little bit deeper. So that's usually how I approach the beginning sessions.
And so then you've had this extensive experience, you've worked with so many people, and you have this growing frustration to then eventually go on this entrepreneurial dive with your co-founder, Steph.
Yeah.
And precursor to Hoame was Ease. So
it is, yeah.
How did that initially start? Like because that's a big jump, right? To actually say, okay, we're going to start a business.
Oh, huge. Yeah. Like it was so funny because this, like for us at the time, I was working in the hospital. I had like my private practice. Steph had her private practice. And then we started this little side hustle, which was Ease, which was bringing corporate wellness to like wellness and education to corporations. But it was just a side gig. Like we got certified to run a suicide training course and a mental health first aid course. And we just put up this little like flyer, and we ended up later on making a little website and printing out some business cards. But originally it was just like a little flyer and an email list. And we started renting a space at a co-sharing space. And for us, we never dreamed that would turn into anything. We thought it was just like a side gig for some extra money. And we were doing that. But then what we started to see, which was really cool, was that we started to sell out these classes. And we never thought that we would have these like 20, 30, 40, people coming to a class. And then from there, we were getting a lot of people from corporations who were saying like, hey, could you guys come and train at our workplace? And so then we were going to these workplaces and like training like 100 people and 200 people. And we're like, this is really cool. And then not only did they want like suicide intervention and mental health, but then a lot of the HR departments were asking us about how do you help incorporate mental health strategies, and how do you change the corporate culture so that it's a little bit more, focused on mental wellness and all of these kinds of things. And so it was really that made us start thinking like it would be really cool if we had our own space where we would celebrate wellness and mental health. And originally we were thinking maybe it would be like we'd have like a workshop and maybe we'd see clients here. Maybe it would be like a wellness center. And then we kind of pivoted from that idea of a wellness center and into like this idea of taking meditation and mindfulness mainstream. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of how it it was an interesting journey because it was never the intention, to be honest, to create, this huge meditation center.
Right. And maybe even the precursor to Ease is actually having your own private practice, yes. So to speak.
Yeah.
Was that another intentional thing, or did it happen just organically?
All of these things, honestly, it's so funny because I say that now, like it's like all of these things just kind of very like serendipitously happened in my life. But I was working actually for a hospital, and across the street. So most of my clinical practice is children and adolescents. And that's who I would usually, that was always the group of people that I would tend to see most at the hospital. If I was ever working with a colleague, anytime a child would come in, they'd put me on that case. That's where I feel the most connection. And so I was working in the hospital, but there was a high school across the street. And the high school wanted to put a clinician into the high school to provide therapy to the kids right in the school. And so we started this really cool partnership with the hospital and the high school to try to divert, instead of kids coming to the Emerge, they could just see me in the guidance office. So I was doing that 2 days a week. And as I was there, just so happened there was a guidance counselor who was also a therapist, and he was working there. And they just happened to have an extra office for rent at their place right around the corner from the hospital and the school that I was working at. And it was super cheap rent. It was one day a week to rent this place. And I was like, I'll give it a go. Maybe I'm making some good connections here with these kids. Maybe I could start seeing them outside of the school. And that was how it started. It was I just said yes. I was they made me sign on for 3 months. So I was okay, if at the end of 3 months, I don't have any clients, then I'm going to quit it. But then it worked, and that's been over 5 years, and I have a very thriving full practice right now.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And so you had that on the side, and then you said, okay, well, I'm going to have something else on the side.
Totally.
To start a corporate wellness thing. So, and it sounds like it's completely different where you have therapy where you're actually working with people one-on-one, right? This corporate thing where it seems like it was a group session where you're just or were you giving workshops?
Workshops. How
people, the how-tos, the 5 steps, that kind of thing?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then from there you decided, okay, let's create Hoame.
And then from there, yeah, and that's, yep. I know, it's I didn't have enough going on yet.
Yeah.
So.
And so for someone who's actually working in the mental health profession, and I've read about how ambitious and goal-oriented you are as a person, and your resume kind of speaks for itself, given that how you try to do so many different things.
Yeah.
How do you balance that, given what you know about mental health and how people who are very overly ambitious can kind of push themselves to, I guess, this path of never feeling like they're doing enough?
Totally.
I've been suffering through that.
Have you? Yeah.
So
super common.
I used to work at a hedge fund. I quit it to kind of start this own media platform with the podcast and everything. And that's been a journey that I've had to go alone, because I haven't had friends who are going through something similar. So I do my therapy by talking to entrepreneurs like you who get to share what they're going through.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, for you, how do you handle that as someone who's more of a professional?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what's really helped is often what I like is having the variety. For me, that's always been the thing that I've really enjoyed about having so many different things, was that's what kind of fills me back up, is that I'm at my practice Wednesdays and Saturdays, and then the rest of the time I'm doing some other kind of interesting things. And so that's really, I think, having that variety to me just in and of itself is really helpful. But you're right. I've had to get much better with being able to, it wasn't only until this year or 2 years ago or so that I started being able to say no or not right now to things, and really making sure that I carve out this time for myself. And that's been something that I'm getting a lot better at. I'm certainly not perfect at it, but I really try to turn off my phone at nighttime. I try now not to be working 24/7. I try to make sure I have really, good time out with my friends and that kind of thing. So that's been huge for me. But the other part here, and what's really, I think, kind of saved me in so many ways working at home, has been working with friends and family. Our team, our co-founding team, which is there's 5 of us total. Steph and I are my primary, and then we have 3 other people as our team. And then, of course, the larger team of all of our staff. But what's been so incredible is the team and the dynamic is that we have a lot of fun together. So as much as it's work, like we laugh all the time. We've got this ridiculous group chat going on now with this like hilarious memes and like silly jokes. And that's the part I think that's just really helped me through it all, is that like you just got these other, people there to just have a good time with. So.
And how do you then handle the kind of the I call it like my own kind of inner demon where it just wants to do more, but
oh my gosh,
stopping it and kind of pacing it down and being slow.
Totally.
How do you handle that?
That's a tough one, I think, because, slow is not really the word that we use around here. Everything is fast. Everything happens right now. But I created a thing, I call it the later list. So it was this idea of like, when I have so many ideas in my head and there's so many things that I want to do, it's kind of like, okay, well, what am I doing right now? And then what's the later list? And so I'll kind of park things now on this later list to try to kind of like tell myself, okay, Carolyn, like, that doesn't have to be a right now thing. It can be a later thing. And so I'm trying to get better at doing that.
Yeah, that makes me feel like I'm kind of going on the right path too, just because now there's someone else who's kind of doing something similar. So I've created something on my own kind of Evernote called the Idea Bank, and I've just been tossing everything into my quote unquote idea bank. That,
totally.
Like just before our interview, I was actually tossing stuff in there too, and I was looking at everything. I have stuff from 2018 July, but it's okay. That's
right. It's totally okay, because at some point you'll get around to it, right? Or it's a cool idea that will have its time when it needs to come out, right? So. And
in terms of actually doing all this stuff, though, like I'm curious, what motivates you to do all this? Because right now we're talking about all these successes, but I can only imagine that there were a lot of difficulties and struggles all throughout.
Totally, there is, yeah. Especially, I think the biggest has been, creating a business, right? I mean, as you know, I mean, there's ups and downs, and there's like the highest of highs, but there's the lowest of the lows. And I think for me, it's always just coming back to that core vision of, when we first started talking, of that feeling of like always knowing that like part of my career path was going to be in the helping field. And I really believe in what we're doing here really, really strongly. And I believe in the work that we're doing. I believe that the way that most people are living their life in modern day right now in North America is not sustainable. It's really toxic to our mental health and well-being. And so to be a part of like this like push to mental health and mental wellness and mental well-being is just like part of like who I am. And so, I feel this like intensity in terms of like my passion and my purpose to do this work.
And so when you actually, so far in the journey of Hoame, like what's like a struggle that kind of pops out into your mind where it's, maybe people outside just don't think of it as obvious, or even when you were going through it, you didn't think this would be a very like obvious like struggle that you'd even experience?
It's a great question, because there's a lot. I mean, I think for us, we didn't know anything. Like truly, when we opened this business, we knew that we wanted to open a business around meditation and mindfulness. I had never worked a POS system in my life. I had never run a store, ran a business, done, architect or design. Like this space was totally gray. So done permitting, like all of that stuff we had to learn on the fly as we were going, trying to negotiate to get a corporate lease, like any of that stuff. We didn't know what we were doing at all. And we've just kind of learned social media, marketing, advertising. Like these are worlds that like, are so beyond me. So I like, I had to do this deep dive into trying to figure out how to do this as we were going through it. So I think for me, that's been the biggest learning, was just realizing, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and, and just try to kind of keeping your head above water, I think was always the thing, right? Yeah. And then it's a business too, and it's a big business in Toronto. So it's also, there's always those financial woes and concerns and that kind of stuff. And then sometimes there's that challenge of running a meditation studio, but then also it's a business too, and managing those competing sometimes ideas, right? Do you feel like now it's at a spot where things are kind of hitting that equilibrium point of like it's good now, or do you feel like you're still kind of drowning? No, it's hit this spot. It was like once we hit like the 12-month mark, we all just like collectively like could take like finally breathe. Like we just like, it's like we had all been holding our breath for a year. So we were like, okay. And so the first year, I don't have children, but I kind of liken it to what it could be like that, that first like quarter. We didn't know, like we were barely sleeping. We didn't know if we were coming or going. We would joke, but it was for real. And my staff will be angry that I was going to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. We had this communal deodorant in here that we would all just use because like none of us had showered. Like we were just like, it was that kind of like early days where you just don't know what the heck you're doing. That was the first quarter. And then we kind of hit our stride and we started to learn and kind of, I kept saying we needed to find our rhythm and our heartbeat, you know, and once we found that, we really kind of grabbed onto that. And after that first 12 months, we were like, okay, yeah, we can do this. Like, you know, the baby's okay. The baby's still alive, you know, so it was good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've interviewed a lot of, I'd say, digital entrepreneurs on the podcast where, a lot of them have, you know, these software companies, but to actually run a space, that's also a completely different animal on its own, I think, where you have all these other obligations, and it's, I guess in one element, it's great because then you see it coming alive in front of you with your eyes, but at the same time, I can only imagine the kind of stress that you go through it. Like,
oh, totally.
What, is there kind of one big thing that kind of stood out to you as like, I never expected this would be like a big problem?
Oh, I feel like there's like, and it'll probably come to me later, there was just not a lot of problems, because I think actually, to be honest, we've been very lucky and very I don't know, things have kind of overall, I mean, I can't sit here and say they've been super smooth because they haven't, you know, but overall things have been there hasn't been the catastrophes. I'm going to knock on wood for that, because there has been no like catastrophic things that have happened. There's been a lot of challenges, but there's been things that we didn't know. I mean, we had, you know, our plumbing backed up and we had no idea what the heck to do. And that was like just into opening. We had this huge media day that was going to come, and we figured out how to like figure that out at like 2 a.m. And, you know, we had heating problems in here, and we've had noise complaints, and we, you know, and dealing with customer, you know, complaints, and thankfully not very many, but just the whole customer service side of things. We had a horrific website when we first opened, like crashed a whole bunch of times. And yeah, so like there was like things like that. We didn't actually have cleaning when we first opened, or garbage delivery, or like any of these like things that you would think you would have. We didn't have any of that because we didn't know that we needed those.
Right. So I don't think anyone really does until they actually run a store.
You literally don't. And then you're like, who's going to take your garbage away? And you're like, oh yeah. Like, you know, and how do you pay certain things, and, you know, just like all of these kind of silly things, but big, you know, just all these things that you don't realize until you're actually running it, you know, and flow. And also just like, thankfully we've been really blessed with incredible people coming in. But, you know, I remember, you know, when we first opened, and, you know, staff would say, well, how do I do this? Or what do I do? I'm like, literally, I have no idea. I'm like, make up whatever you think sounds good, because we didn't know, right? So all of those kinds of things. So it's probably like a series of lots of small things versus like one big catastrophe.
And as someone who runs a meditation studio, what's I guess a stereotype, like an assumption that your friends have of like what you do, but that's just completely incorrect, and you have to remind them that that's not really what I actually do.
I don't. Well, the one thing we always joke about as a team is that running a meditation studio, you know, you'd think that it's not going to be stressful. So that's like the big running joke with us. It's like, who would have thought that running a meditation studio is so stressful? But it is. But I also think there's that preconception of what meditation is all about. And so oftentimes it's really funny, because when I tell people, I say, oh yeah, I run a meditation studio in Toronto. It's often not until people look us up or come to Hoame, they're like, what? I didn't know you ran a meditation studio like that. Because their idea is they think it's going to be some, I don't know, like hippie kind of, I don't know, like when they think of meditation, what they think of, but not certainly not a modern kind of innovative space like we have here. So that's something I always get, is like, they're like, I had no idea that your space would look like that. And then, yeah, certainly the stress piece, I think, is the big one. Yeah,
as you're telling me your story, it made me think that I guess it's kind of good in one way, because all business running is stressful, but your business is all about helping alleviate stress, so you can constantly use your own product.
Well, that's the great thing. Like, to be honest, like we have a lot of our meetings like in the salt cave.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and like it's so often like you'll just find me like in the dark room is my favorite spot, and I'll just shut the door and I'm just like having a moment in there. And then we take classes all the time. So
and I can totally understand this. I guess like still the current day stigma of like, oh yeah, like meditation studios are kind of quote unquote like hippie, but you're, you know, like from the tour I can tell it's very somewhat like very kind of high tech. I'd say these different like meditation rooms, like you have the dark room, the light room, the salt cave. I was actually very curious, why do you have a salt cave? Why is meditation, I didn't know meditation and salt were related.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily related, but we were kind of, when we were concepting the space, we had like the two studios, and we loved the idea of like this duality of like dark and lightness, and the different kind of vibe that each class gives you, or each room gives you. And then we had more space, and we're like, it would be neat to kind of have smaller, a little bit more intimate, a little bit more private type experience rooms. And so we were playing with this idea of like, what could it be? Because we wanted something where you still have to disconnect. You still have to like leave your phone at the front. You still have to kind of go and just kind of be still. And so we were playing with this idea of like, we knew we wanted the heat, the hot of the sauna. And that sauna is a place where you can come and you can sweat. But many people meditate in a sauna or in that kind of space. And so we're like, what's the opposite of a sauna? And so originally we were playing with this idea of like cryo or cold or whatever. And then we're like, yeah, like cold, like a cave. And then that was kind of what started that conversation. So that's how it came about.
Oh, okay. And so for the listeners who are actually very curious, you should actually go up and look up the pictures for the salt cave, because it's actually an entire cave just with salt inside. And I was actually stepping into actual salt.
That's right.
I think that was actually a very good touch that you added there too. Where,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you had to like stand on the salt.
Yeah. And also this, I think even the experience in the beginning where as soon as I came in to the front, they said, take off your shoes, and I was going to be walking with my socks. And when did that become like an intentional idea? I'm very curious on like how that kind of started out. Let's just make people walk without shoes.
It was from the very beginning. It was this idea of, again, coming into someone's home, right? And so it was like, we want people to feel like you're coming into a home. And so it's like, come, sit down, take off your shoes, put them away, and then it's like you're home. Like, just relax, you're here.
Right.
So, yeah, it's been since day one.
Oh, okay. Because from one perspective, it seems like such an unconventional thing to do for a business.
Totally.
And, you know, it seems like your career has been filled with a lot of unconventional steps. So I'm wondering, is there a particular kind of unconventional move that you feel like paid off big time, where at the moment it just seemed very scary, or people around you are saying like, what are you doing? And you feel like when you look back on it, it was a no-brainer, where of course I would have done that kind of decision.
I mean, to be honest, it's open in this space. Like, we didn't actually even tell people that we were open. Like, my friends and family didn't know that I was opening this space until it was open. Most of them. Some of them, a few knew, but like the larger, like extended family didn't know. And same with my friends, because it sounded, to me, it sounded ridiculous. Like, how do I start telling people like, oh yeah, I'm going to open up like this 5,100 square foot meditation studio, and people not think like, okay, like what's wrong with Carolyn? Like, why is she doing this? You know, and it was hard for me, because I knew what, and Steph as well, we knew what it would look like in our head. We knew how we wanted it to be, but it was hard to articulate it verbally at the beginning, to kind of tell people, like, how do you tell people it's going to be this really cool, innovative, huge, but like people are going to come to it. And so that was something that we kind of like hid from people. And we kind of like did this in the dark and kind of like kept it really silent until we could actually invite people here and have them really see the vision from start to finish. But now looking back on it, now it's incredible the amount of sort of validation that we've had, not only from our customers and consumers, but from friends and family and other people in the business world who have been like, that's such an incredible idea and I wish I thought of it, and those kinds of things. But 2 years ago when we were first thinking about this, it sounded to us, it was like, and it was the biggest leap I've ever taken in my life to launch something like this. I mean, that was the scariest, most terrifying thing I've ever done, has been opening up this business. So
yeah, I can only imagine if you, without actually having the business, telling people, going up to and saying, I'm gonna charge people money, and they're gonna come in and sit down, and it's gonna be silence, and I'm giving them the space to not do anything. And that's my business, right? It's hard to like articulate. Right, especially if you're talking to people who most, I think, are still like skeptics of some point of meditation. They'll say, are you kidding me? People are gonna pay you for that?
That's exactly, and that was our concern. So I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to say it. And I'm like, just come and experience it. And that's what I always tell people, is like, give yourself the experience and then you'll see. Yeah.
And so do you find that actually having the space open has given you this newfound of confidence in actually telling people now what you're doing?
So much more so. Yeah. I mean, even actually it was interesting, like, you know, when we had to start, because then you open a business, and again, this idea of like media and podcasts and all of that is not our world. Like, that's not something I've ever been a part of. And all of a sudden now you have to like talk about the business and be out there and sell the business as well. And it's been so exciting, because absolutely, I mean, you know, we all feel so strongly in what we've done here and what we've created, that it's really exciting to talk about it now. And there is definitely a big confidence that I never had before to be able to talk about this business.
And so then on reflection, like, so some of the questions ending kind of questions I like asking my guests is, one is if you can reflect back to the past. So if you can think about, let's say, the 24-year-old Caroline, that is still kind of going through her early career in like mental health. What advice would you like to have received at that point, or would you like to give if you could go back in time to that 24-year-old self of yours?
Great question. I don't know. I'd tell her probably a few things. I think I would tell her to rest more. Because I worked really hard, and on one hand I'm really appreciative of all that, but I also think it would have been wonderful if I had found meditation and mindfulness and like self-care practices earlier on, I think, in my career. I think I could have saved myself a lot of stress. So I would have said that. And then also the reassurance to just, it's okay to take risks. I didn't take as big risks before. And I think that was, something I gained that confidence to do later in my life, but I would have taken more risks earlier on, I think. Yeah. And
for someone who's been in the mental health arena for a while, if someone approaches you and says, I want to get into meditation, but I'm not very good at keeping up with things, how do you recommend people start?
Yeah. So I always say, is just start small, right? The amazing thing with meditation and mindfulness is that even things as short as 3 to 5 minutes of a mindful breath practice can be beneficial. So that's the first thing. Is just start small. You don't have to put this expectation that it's 30 minutes or an hour, every day, X amount of times per week. It doesn't have to be anything like that. But the other part is, I love, again, the guided idea, right? Because I feel often, it's even myself, when I go to the gym, I prefer classes over working out by myself because I know I'm going to get a proper workout and I'm guided by somebody who knows what they're doing. So I say, come take a class or, download an app and try. And just try and see if each time you do it, can you increase your time a little bit? Can you sink into that meditation a little bit more? And just be easy with yourself. The big thing with meditation is it's a practice like anything else. You're not going to be great at it when you first start, and that's fine, right? Continue it, though. Stay with it because the benefits are going to be really worth it.
And would you say that the classes at home are there's different levels for the beginner level and intermediate?
Yeah, so we have some classes, and that's the interesting thing with Hoame is we've really tried to gear our classes to all levels, and certainly there are variations where you can kind of sink a little bit deeper into things. We do have a breathwork 1 and 2, so the second breathwork is a lot deeper. We also have a class called Explore, which really kind of takes you into a deeper dive into meditation and mindful practices. But we have a class for everyone. I mean, we have sound classes, which is a great first step for people who don't meditate very often, because the sound itself can really help people slip into a meditative state a lot easier. So, I mean, look at the different types of classes, see what kind of resonates with you, because there might be easier ways for you to fall into meditation. Meditation, unlike what many people think, you don't have to be seated and your legs crossed, holding your fingers together and going, oh, that's not what's going on in here. And that if that's for some people, but it doesn't have to be for everyone. And so I always tell people, just come try it and see what works for you.
Awesome. And so is there anything that you wish that we had kind of covered that we didn't get to cover today that you maybe want to leave my listeners with?
No, I mean, I think you covered it. I think you really highlighted, what we're doing here and how meditation and mindfulness can be really helpful, especially in that busy modern world we've got out there.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with myself and my audience. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care. All right. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope the story was inspiring to you. Hopefully it also helped you expand your perspectives. Hopefully it also made you question the default path that you might have been going on, or the default beliefs you might have had. And maybe now it'll make you even think about doing something about it, doing something different, maybe challenging yourself, being courageous. Who knows? But regardless, I'm really happy that you took some time out of your day to listen to this fantastic story with my guest. And if you would like to somehow, in some way, contribute and help support the podcast, and maybe even just be part of the community that I'm trying to build with the greater OMD Ventures platform, really think about being a stakeholder in the platform. And the quick way to do that is to go to my website, oldmandan.com, and go to the stakeholders page. I believe it's oldmandan.com/stakeholder. And the link is also down below. And that's how you can figure out how you can subscribe, follow to get more updates on the free content. But at the same time, also donate. And donate by actually just buying me a coffee. That's just how I put it. And you can buy me a coffee a month, coffee a week, or coffee every day of the year. And think about it as the way that, if you wanted to chat with me, you might just bring me out for coffee and buy me a coffee. Or if you wanted to bring one of my guests out to chat, you might buy them a coffee. So just think of it as I'm the service that's doing that for you, so you can just pay me in coffees. Don't worry, everything will still be free. It would just really help if you would like to show your support this way, so that I can use the coffee money to buy myself actual coffees, and also to buy my guests actual coffees, and use the leftover money to actually grow the platform, as well as even keep it operationally alive as well, because all this isn't really free, and it does take a lot of time to build it as well as operate it and hopefully grow it further. So your support would be amazing if you would like to contribute. And so just check out the website, go to the stakeholders page, and read the different kind of benefits you might even get as a stakeholder. All right, thank you.